um, pressure waves. There, there was a guy that I watched a short little video and then I stopped it because now it just kickstarts a big library, and so I put information in there, which is hypertext, which is holographic codes, right? So now what happens is that individual that had put that video up when he talked about atmospheric rivers, right? And he was flying an airplane, and I'm not sure exactly who he works for, but what he was trying to show holographically using his mirror that we're going to mirror is the geographics of California, in particular in Southern California and some of the bigger reservoirs, how they're being impacted as a result of all the absorption and the evaporation rate between pressure systems, pressure waves, between low pressure and high pressure, right? Because I'm hearing the ecospheres. That's why when you're with me, and I've described this before, I'm monitoring the pressure waves in the planet. I'm hearing it's. Remember, I mentioned it's like being inside of an air compressor, right? And all the frequencies, the bells going on, the bells, the frequencies, what I call radio traffic, routing. You know what a router is, right? Routing radio traffic. And that gives you an idea on how much activity is actually taking place in a given time-space vector, right? That's why some days on this island it get real hot. And I look around and I know there's a lot of ships, right? And naturally, because things are just naturally changing over time space, right? Unless you want to hit the pause button on the planet, right? Pause. Remember that little blurb that Twilight Zone did one time? When Rod Serling hit the pause button and everybody that was once dancing, this was in black and white film, everybody stopped. But he didn't stop. Now you can still experience his mouthpiece, his microphone speaking to us. Sort of like that, you know, when you're running a play 2, record 1, rewind. Because that's what happened when I pulled a hard reset to light myself on fire. What happened is that all the frames, the frame rate speed, which is the ISO speed. So like every time that your eyeballs, you know, when they blink, adjusting the holographic speed, which is the ISO frame rate speed of how fast events are actually changing, which is based on the mathematics. It's based on the codes. I call them color codes of what you see in your mirror. Right? So I'm in love with my mirror. Right? So everything that is in that mirror, from the microcosm, which means a small organism of energy that is self-aware, to the biggest. Remember the 1,000-foot gorilla? How much space do you need to be a 1,000-foot gorilla? A Godzilla. A Godzilla that's funny. A Godzilla that's experiencing what love is. So it's not what you look like, is it? You can be a gorilla having fun, experiencing God. God can be a Godzilla. You know that, right? It just means the shape, form, and color. Okay? It may look like Godzilla, but he's laughing and singing and dancing, just like you see in the cartoons, right? Did you ever see Heckle and Jekyll in the 1950s? Using a corn cob, right? And it sounded like a typewriter as the little kernels of corn were popping off. Like a carriage return on a typewriter. Right? And they were having fun. They were what? Ravens? See? Illustrators, artists, musicians, right? The first musician. So you realize that the first musician, God, can be whatever he wants to be in his mirror. How much energy you want to use in order to experience that, right? Just make it happen. Now it appears. The image of God, right? Genesis, genetics, the biotech. So one of the things that I remember as a child growing up when you're androgynous, which is perfect balance, right? All the atoms are cycling perfect balance. I'm in a state of harmony, baby, playing music. was covered a little bit of this about before with how you can cross-translate the programming, which is the APIN system, or the reality that we find ourselves in, trying to get along with one another, right? To experience harmony, balance, and rhythm of the waves, or the units of energy that are conscious and aware of themselves, because we're all connected to each other, right? Running operating systems on a motherboard. And so it had to do with relationships between atoms, atmospherics, really. But you can see when I was a child that it was defined as if a girl is a girl and a boy is a boy, right? So there were things that girls do and things that boys do, and I found myself always wanting to be with girls. Why would I prefer to be with girls? Raise the higher octave. Okay, because you have the boy side that's feeding on the girl side. So now the girl's energy is going down. So if you heal the girl, that'll help heal the male side. So what it really means is across the minus / the plus, which is calculus, right? Between negative and positive magnetic polarity. So what I'm trying to do is balance it out so that I experience the balance in me. So I'm a balancer. You know, just like somebody that walks a tightrope, right? It's got to be balanced in an electromagnetic energy field. Right? So I can remember being around, you know, what we call peer pressure. Now we're back to pressure, right? Low pressure, high pressure systems, atmospherics. You know, breathing in and breathing out. You know, a living planet that's breathing in and out. Wow, this is a big living organism we're in. Yeah. Right? Breathers. Yeah. And we're not going into all the oxygen content side of this. H2 plus 1 equals 3. What I remember distinctly was how we define our relationships with each other and the way that they were using gender as a method of programming. Okay? Because they don't want us in balance. Right? Then they don't have a source of energy to feed on anymore, do they? Right? Or the atmospherics, the atoms, the electrons, protons, and neutrons are in balance. So you want the nuclear reactors to be in balance, right? Yeah. And so, for example, I can remember the word called sissy. Boys were considered sissy. So I loved to hang out with my mother. Okay? My mother was an angel. Okay? Which means I know that my mother was a human angelic. Okay? So my mother could read you. Okay? If she was amazing. Very protective of my energy. And without going into my history of why I chose the family that I did, I would naturally choose that, knowing that, right? Same thing with my father. Because I knew that my father was going to lead me to places that I was going to be. So I needed to be where I was going to be for the reasons that I'm going to be there. High precision. God's math is very highly, it doesn't make a mistake, remember? 0 errors. Perfect balance. So I remember the word sissy, see? And that's pressure. Ooh. Now we're back to central nervous system, nerve centers. Right? The nerve centers that are in balance. The neurons are in balance. The circuits are all in balance. Right? Between the poles. Right? The planetary poles. And so the language became a manner in which people didn't want to experience the pressure. Remember, peer pressure? So I found myself in an environment, right, in which I had to negotiate the energy, because that's what it is, of electrons, protons, and neutrons between the two magnetic poles by virtue of the beings that I was associated with and connected with when I was growing up as a little boy. Right? Of what was held in their memory, which means like following the instruction sets based on the programming, right? On what a boy is and what a girl is. Right? Girls do this, boys do this. And how that gets passed on and circulated as a library circulation of information that's held in water banks, blood banks, based on race lines of communication. Right? Yeah. Kisha Ra. Kundere, the rays, The rays, like a manta ray, like a ma and ray, ra, why. So it's music, yeah. And so we play music. The notes, the musical notes, playing a piano, playing an organ, playing a drum, playing a bongo. The vibration and the frequencies. So you know that God loves musicians, and you know that God loves poets and storytellers. So the way that the neutral ground works, even though they want to shoot the messenger and kill the story. Now, if you're a newspaper man and you work in the CIA, NSA, or sometimes it just gets ridiculous, because I listened to Bill Donahue, who did a great job of sort of breaking down the Essenes, tied directly to Ashadian, the workshop materials, the Essenes and Jesus, right? Some people associate different names with Joshua and Yeshua, right? And a lot of the information that was put up by Dante Sartori with all his videos coupled all this information into a nice little rainbow package, right? Of when you think of a Christos mission, I just like I mentioned to Karen McDonald, this is a salvage mission. Service contracts, being a universal hub server. Hubs, spoke wheels, cobwebs, all the webs, lines of communication, and how that works with consciousness traps. Ooh, I'm trapped in this. My consciousness is in this trap, just like something gets trapped in a web. Hey, now I'm food. Yeah, food. That's right. Food for energy harvesting. That's what it is. It's an energy harvesting system. So I try and sort of move on beyond what I call the peripheral stuff, because we can get bogged down with spending all day long talking about the things that, the nuts and bolts, right, of how you put a bigger puzzle together. So I try and bring it down to the least common denominator. It began with what love is. So love is what heals us, right? So it just gets too simple. It's just like yesterday being in the van. I hadn't experienced this in a long time. And I go out once a week to go get some things at a natural food store. I picked up some spirulina. And on our way back, when the driver was dropping this one lady off, all of a sudden I felt depressed. Most folks, I imagine, know what it means to feel depressed. Your spirit felt low, right? Like all of a sudden your energy drops, you feel depressed. The way that depressed is expressed as something that you feel. It's an energetic read. Okay, so I realized that that's not me. I'm experiencing somebody else's depression. Okay, and that's because the people that I go out with every Tuesday, usually every Tuesday, are folks that live in Section 8 homes. Just like this poor lady, bless her heart, Glenda, that I have a beautiful relationship with. She mentioned to me yesterday, yeah, it took me a while to get into Section 8 housing. Otherwise, I'd have been homeless. This lady could barely get around with a walker. Okay? That kind of stuff will make me cry forever in my heart, because that's what it is. Right? And the reason I know that she was experiencing being depressed and I was experiencing her depression is because she didn't talk at all the entire ride into town and back. And usually she's very talkative, which means her spirit's up a little bit, her energy's up a little bit. So this is, this goes back to 4 years of age. I experienced what you experience, because there's no separation between what I am and what you are that I give love to. So when you're experiencing something, I experience what you are, what you're experiencing. Right? And so I guess it takes a while for folks to learn that, that there isn't any separation between what I am and what you are. And when you have you're running a hypersensitive antenna, I feel everything. So when I was 4 years of age, I was feeling everything that's happening on the planet and measuring it by the loss and gain of electrons. So you realize something is harvesting an enormous amount of energy on this planet, which is why it's so out of balance. So when you're running an avatar, right, and you're in perfect balance because you're androgynous, you're measuring the distance over time. Now we're back to the quantum probability function, right, of the approximate date in which it's going to collapse. Bye. Right? So you're doing everything that you can while you're here, knowing that you're connected with others that are doing grid work. Okay? To provide a buffer zone. You know, just like the same way that any torsion field movie player works. You know what sound buffering is, right? 1080p, right? You can tie 1080p into 360 degrees, right? It's the same way I talked about vinyl records running at 45 RPMs or 33 1/3, running a diamond. Sound and light patterns, right? And the patterns of communication, now we're into patterns of behavior, the ability to correct. I mean, it's just, it was amazing enough when I lit myself on fire in 2016 and did a full reset calibration. It's like going back to the beginning of creation is what it is, actually, because I realized, hey, another circle of light. Now I'm breathing in and out again. What do you want to experience next? That love experiences, right? So you're on fire, you know, to create, because love is the energy that we do it with, right? And so tying that to my childhood, you know, when I was a little boy growing up, and then realizing when I took a nosedive, what I call a nosedive, like a death spiral, right? After the enormous amount of trauma that a polarity integrator is willing to experience throughout the entire cosmos, if you will. Okay? Because we're connected to everything. There isn't any separation. So when you're an oversoul, okay, as a polarity integrator, then it means that wherever we are, we're experiencing what you are. So when you sort of think about it as circuits that are connected to other circuits, that are connected to other circuits, that are connected to other matrices, right? And you do a reset, right? And you realize, hey, I'm connected to everything there is because it began with what love is. Then anywhere that God is not experiencing what love is going to detect it. That's hypersensitivity. That's stealth code speed. Because don't you think God wants to protect everything that came out of what love is? Which is protecting myself. Right? So now we're back to restoring me is restoring you. So imagine you're 4 years of age knowing that. That means I got to restore the whole universe. Otherwise, I'm still experiencing something that needs to heal. So they experience what I am, which is what love is. That's what we are. That's a beloved. Being what love is. So there's a difference between knowing what love is and experiencing what love is and being what love is. That's full restoration. That means you've been able to clean your clock. You know, your clock cycles, your cosmic atmospherics, the way that atoms cycle in perfect balance with each other, that are on fire to create. You've cleared all the miasma, right? So even though I did my reset, it doesn't mean that I'm not experiencing trauma, because I am every day, right? All I got to do is just go onto this phone to any YouTube channel, and it's there. Right, so now you're looking at the speed differential between recovery rate of healing and those that can heal, and that's called a course direction on a magnetic compass. So they're experiencing less broken arrows. Now we're back to speed and the recovery speed, right? And now we're back to the quantum probability function with recovery speed of healing. That's why I've always said they were in a race against time. They knew they were in a race against time. Between the speed at which we can recover and heal and do grid work, right? And the things that they were going to do what? Counter it. That's called a counter space move. Between minus / to plus, right? So you make a positive move, it makes a counter space move. You make a positive move, it makes a counter space move, right? And that's because it's in resistant mode. It's in resistance to heal. Why? Because it's still at war against itself, its own mirror. Okay? Remember how Ashadon talked about free will? You get free will. And for me, I define that as being a free spirit. Now your energy is not held captive because you're not holding anything else captive. Remember, leashes, leashes, collars, and cages. Why they put the tie with the symbol of the tie around the neck? Right? Psh, grab, we used to play around this with a kid. We'd grab the guy's tie and following him around. Way, let go of that tie. Right? That's the same thing as putting a leash and collar around a dog. I got control over your energy. How am I going to get to know you as a dog if you realize that you're a battery slave attached to me? Scale that up to everything in nature on the entire planet. That's holding energy that is conscious and self-aware captive, right? That gets into a whole other library subject of, well, what if you left the dog alone and just be running around? Does it know how to survive on the planet, given its own instruction sets of what to do on how to survive without causing harm to anybody else? Right? Remember how she talked about all the mutations? And how I covered what it was like? Well, if I'm giving love to everything that's in creation, right, then I'm not supposed to experience a zebra being eaten by a lion, because the same eternal unconditional love I'm giving to a lion is the same eternal unconditional love I'm giving to a zebra. So now I'm experiencing the loss in the lion as a result of the trauma that's being experienced in a zebra. Quantify that. So you realize none of this makes sense. This is not my memory. This is not an eternal creation energy sphere, a realm. So you're in a fallen system because it's energy harvesting. So that means it doesn't matter what it is. Okay, which means, remember, this, the visible light spectrum, it's not what you look like. Okay, so remove all the mass. Forget that it looks like a zebra or a lion. Doesn't matter what it is. Okay, it just means energy's being lost. It's being fed on. So now you can measure this in the quantumability between the minus / the plus on a pole shift, right? Be able to maintain its integrity, the spiritual integrity, the spiritual balance of energy, which is how atoms cycle. Now we're back to atmospheres, low pressure and high pressure systems, the absorption rate and the evaporation rate. There was a news channel that actually covered that yesterday when he talked about how they were anticipating a very wet winter, right? And more humid weather in the summertime in California versus drier weather, right? As a result of the weather patterns, right? Weather patterns of consciousness. The atmosphere, consciousness that is gas, right? Hydrogen, the most abundant element, right? H2O, water vapor. Yeah, so sissies, the word sissy is what kickstarted this particular video. Because I remember that other boys, they used the word, other boys would call other boys that if they were, if they displayed any sort of real balance, instead of the force side, I'm a tough guy, I'm strong, I'm competitive, and all the rest of it, they were called a sissy. See? And that was considered to be pressure, to be more like them, rather than them being what came natural to them to be. See? So now we're back to Tucker Carlson and androgynous. Nuclear physics. You could teach nuclear physics to 5 and 6, 7-year-old children. You know that, right? So they can understand how it works between how gender is defined using nuclear science, fission and fusion, between sound and light patterns of creation spheres, right? So they had no interest in sharing that kind of information because it's not in their interest to do that. It's like I mentioned the lady yesterday, about this nice Chinese lady who's that sits in the back, came up and pulled a pen and a piece of paper out of her purse, and she goes, "I was listening to information you were sharing with Glenda. Could you please write some of this stuff down? So I was talking to her about the relationship between electrons, protons, and neutrons and how that relates to maintaining your pH in your plasma, right? So when you urinate in the morning,